The night my son cried about the Four Horsemen, I realized something had already begun. Before I tell you this, really tell you this, I need you to understand something. I am not a mystic. I am not a theologian. I am not someone who spent her life in churches, reading prophecies, or chasing miracles. I was just a mother who had a son. And that son cried. Not the way children cry when they fall, not the way teenagers cry over heartbreak. He cried the way you cry when you already know how something ends, and the ending is not for himself. It was never for himself. He was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, 15 years old, and I walked in thinking it was a normal evening. It wasn't. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red. His face, I will never forget it. Not because it was distorted with fear, because it was calm, devastatingly calm, like someone who had just seen something too big to panic about. I asked him, "Carlo, what's wrong?" And he said, quietly, slowly, like every word cost him something, "Mom, I've been reading about the Four Horsemen." I sat down. And then he said something I have thought about every single day since the moment he left this world. "Mom, people don't understand what's coming, and they don't want to." A 15-year-old boy, my boy, crying not for himself, never for himself, but for strangers, for souls he would never know by name. When was the last time you cried for someone else's soul? Because Carlo did, regularly, quietly, without anyone watching. And I think that's exactly why you're here right now. People have asked me for years, why don't you talk about this side of Carlo, the serious side, the prophetic side, the side that looked at the book of Revelation not as ancient poetry, but as a map. For a long time, I didn't talk about it because I wasn't sure people were ready. But something has changed, and I think you being here right now, I don't think that's an accident. So stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't a biography. It isn't a feel-good story about a holy teenager. This is a testimony. This is what I lived, what I saw, what I heard with my own ears, inside my own home. And there's something I have never said publicly, not completely, not until today. When I finally tell you, you will understand why Carlo cried that night, and you may never see the world the same way again. My name is Antonia Salzano, and I want to be honest with you from the very beginning, because Carlo would have wanted that. He had no patience for performance, no tolerance for masks. If you asked him a question, he answered it truly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. I suppose I owe you the same. I was not always the woman I am today. When Carlo was born, October 3rd, 1991 in London, I was young, ambitious, and if I'm being completely transparent, faith was not the center of my life. I believed in God, yes. I had been raised Catholic, but it was the kind of belief that sits quietly in the background, like a painting on a wall you've stopped noticing. It's there. You know it's there, but it doesn't change the way you move through a room. Carlo changed that, not all at once. He changed it the way water changes stone, slowly, consistently, with a gentleness that somehow carves something permanent. We moved back to Milan when he was still very small, and from the very beginning, there was something about him that was already settled. Most children come into the world grasping, needing, demanding, in the beautiful and exhausting way that children do. Carlo was different. He was present in a way I had never seen in a child, like he had already made peace with something most of us spend our whole lives searching for. Our home in Milan was not a monastery. I want you to picture it correctly. We had a real home, noisy at times, full of the ordinary friction of a family. I had my career, my husband Andrea had his. We traveled. We had dinners and disagreements and laughter like every other family. And in the middle of all of that, there was Carlo, doing his homework at the kitchen table, playing video games. Yes, he played video games. He loved them, and he was good at them. He had this sense of humor that could sneak up on you. You wouldn't expect it, and then suddenly something he said would make the whole room lighter. But then there were other moments. Moments where I would walk past his room and hear nothing, and I would peek in, and he would be completely still. Just praying. Not performing prayer, not saying words while his mind was somewhere else. Actually praying. Deeply. With his whole self. I remember the first time I really noticed it. He was maybe 7 years old. I stood in the doorway without him seeing me, and I thought, who taught him to do that? Because it certainly wasn't me. Not yet. Not at that point in my life. He taught me. I need you to hear that clearly. My son taught me how to pray. My 7-year-old son showed his mother what it looked like to actually believe in something, not as a concept, not as a tradition, but as a living, breathing, daily relationship. He started asking to go to Mass every single day. Every day. My first reaction was not holy. It was the reaction of a busy mother with a schedule and a life. But the way he looked at me when he asked, I couldn't say no. There was something in his eyes that made arguments feel small. So we went. Every day. And slowly, without my permission, without me even realizing it, I started to change. He used to receive the Eucharist and spend a long time afterward just sitting, eyes closed, still. One morning I leaned over and whispered, Carlo, what are you doing? And he looked at me and said, I'm talking to Jesus, Mom. He's here. Just like that. No drama. A child stating a fact he was absolutely certain of. I went home that morning and cried. Something in me recognized that my child was living in a dimension of reality I had only glimpsed at the edges of. And I wanted what he had. This is the context you need. Because when I tell you about the conversations that went far beyond what a teenager should know, you need to understand where we were coming from. We were a real family. I was a real woman, imperfect and searching. Carlo was my son. Not a statue, not a symbol. My son, who left his shoes by the door and forgot to close the refrigerator and laughed too loud at his own jokes sometimes, and who also wept over the end of the world. Both of those things were true at the same time. But here's what nobody tells you about raising a child like Carlo. There are moments that don't fit neatly into a biography. Moments that are too private, too fragile, too spiritually dense to hand over to the world without being certain the world is ready for them. I wasn't certain. For a long time, I wasn't certain. But that's about to change. I need to take you back to a specific afternoon. Carlo was 11 years old. An ordinary Tuesday, or at least it started that way. He came home from school, dropped his backpack by the door the way he always did, grabbed something from the kitchen, went to his room. Normal. Completely normal. But about an hour later, he came and found me. I was in the living room, going through papers for work, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before saying anything. He didn't just walk in talking the way he usually did. He stood there, choosing his words before opening his mouth. I looked up. What is it? He sat down across from me and said, Mom, can I ask you something serious? Carlo asked serious questions regularly. He was not a surface-level child, but something in his tone that afternoon was different. A weight to it, a gravity I hadn't heard before. Not in an 11-year-old. I put my papers down. He said, Do you think most people go to heaven? I gave him what I thought was a reasonable, comforting answer. I said something like, I think God is merciful, and I think he wants everyone to be saved. Carlo nodded slowly, but he didn't look comforted. He looked like someone who had hoped for a different answer. He said, I read something today. He had been spending time, a lot of time, reading. Not just school books, scripture, the writings of the saints, church documents, things most grown adults have never opened. He sat with these texts the way other boys his age sat with comic books, completely absorbed, completely at home. He told me he had been reading about private revelations, about visions and warnings that the church had examined and, in some cases, approved as worthy of belief. And he said very quietly, Mom, So many of them say the same thing. They talk about a time that's coming, a time when everything is going to be different, harder, and most people aren't going to be ready. I remember the feeling in my chest when he said that. Not quite fear, something closer to recognition. Like hearing a word in a foreign language that you somehow already know. I asked, "What do you mean by ready?" He looked at me and said, "Ready in here, Mom." And he touched his chest, right over his heart. That was the first time. The first time I understood that my son was not simply a devout boy who prayed his rosary. Something else was happening inside him. Something too large for his age, too heavy for an 11-year-old's shoulders, and yet he carried it without collapsing. And this is where everything changes. In the weeks that followed, his room began to fill with something new. Printed pages, notes, hand-drawn timelines connecting dates and prophecies and historical events. He was building something. I didn't fully understand what yet. One evening I asked to look at what he was working on. He showed me carefully, like a scholar presenting a thesis. He walked me through connections between approved Marian apparitions and their messages, between the writings of saints who had described spiritual battles in terms that felt strangely current, between scripture, the book of Revelation especially, and patterns he saw unfolding in the world around him. I am not an unintelligent woman, but standing there, listening to my 11-year-old son speak with the fluency and depth of someone who had spent decades studying these things, I felt something I am not ashamed to admit. I felt small, not in a humiliating way, in an awe-filled way. The way you feel small, standing at the edge of the ocean. And then he said something I wrote down that night in my journal, because I knew, instinctively, that I would need to remember it exactly. He said, "Mom, the scary part isn't that bad things might happen. The scary part is that people are going to be surprised, and they shouldn't be. Everything has already been told to us. Everything." I asked, "Then why aren't people listening?" He thought for a long moment, then said, "Because listening requires stillness, and stillness is the one thing the world is working hardest to take away from us." 11 years old. I closed my journal that night and lay in the dark, the apartment quiet, Milan outside doing what cities do, living loudly, forgetting to stop. And I thought about stillness, and I thought about my son in the next room who had found it, and I thought about the Four Horsemen, because that conversation was coming. And I didn't know it yet, but everything Carlo had been assembling, quietly, patiently, with that focused urgency only he seemed to feel. It was all building toward one evening at the kitchen table. But that wasn't the moment that changed everything. Not yet. What came next, between that afternoon and the evening of his tears, is something I have carried almost entirely alone. Until now. There is something I have struggled to talk about publicly, not because I am ashamed, not because I doubt what I experienced, but because there are things that happen inside a family, inside the sacred private space of a home, that feel too tender to expose, too intimate. But I made a decision before I sat down to share this with you today. Carlo did not live the way he lived so that his mother could protect herself from vulnerability. He gave everything. The least I can do is give you the truth. So here it is. Carlo was 13 when something shifted in him. Not frighteningly, not at first, but there was a new intensity to his prayer, a new weight to his silences. This was the prayer of someone in dialogue with something urgent, something pressing. He started waking before sunrise, not because anyone asked him to. He would go to the living room and kneel and pray for an hour, sometimes longer, before the rest of us had even opened our eyes. I discovered this by accident. I woke for a glass of water and saw light under the living room door. I opened it quietly, and there he was, 13 years old, kneeling on the floor in the dark. He hadn't turned the light on, just the faint glow of the city coming through the curtains, hands folded, lips moving almost silently. I stood there for a long moment, and I want to describe this as precisely as I can. I felt like I was standing on holy ground. Like the air in that room was different from the air in the rest of the apartment. I went back to bed without saying anything. In the morning, I asked him casually how he had slept. He smiled and said, "Well, I had a good night." And something in his expression, a quiet satisfaction, told me the night had been full in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. A few weeks later, he came to me after dinner. My husband was in another room. Carlo sat down at the kitchen table, always that table, folded his hands and said, "Mom, I want to talk to you about something." He said, "I've been thinking about what happens to the world when enough people choose, generation after generation, to move away from God, not dramatically, just gradually, quietly, like drifting." I listened. It's not that God punishes the world from the outside, like someone who gets angry and strikes. It's more like, when you remove light from a room, the darkness doesn't attack. It just fills the space the light left behind. He paused. That's what I think is happening right now. And it's been happening for a long time. And the Four Horsemen? Mom, I think they're not just a future event. I think they're a description of a process, and the process is already underway. Something tightened in my chest. I asked, "Carlo, does this frighten you?" And his answer was not what I expected. He said, "It doesn't frighten me for myself. It frightens me for people who don't know. People living their lives, good lives, busy lives, normal lives, with no idea that there is a battle happening around them that they can't see." He looked down at his hands. The frightening thing isn't that the battle is happening. The frightening thing is how easy it would be to wake up, how available the grace is, and yet people don't reach for it, not because they can't, but because no one is telling them, clearly and honestly, that they need to. He looked back up at me. "That's why I'm building the website, Mom." Some of you may know that Carlo spent years building an online exhibition about Eucharistic miracles, a massive, painstaking project that documented miracles from around the world, scientific evidence, historical records, testimonies. He wanted people to encounter proof, tangible, verifiable proof that the Eucharist was real, that faith was not a feeling or a cultural habit, but a response to something objectively, undeniably present. But what most people don't know, what I am telling you now, is that there was a second layer to his motivation. It wasn't just about presenting beautiful evidence, it was urgency. He told me once, if people truly believed, actually believed, that Jesus was present in the Eucharist, everything would change. There would be lines out the door of every church. The world would look completely different. And then, almost to himself, that's the tragedy. The miracle is available to everyone, every single day, and most people walk right past it. He wasn't angry. That is the part that broke my heart the most. He was just sad. The way you are sad when you love something and watch others miss it. And so he worked. He worked with a discipline that adults 3 times his age rarely manage. He documented miracle after miracle. He built something that, even now, continues to change lives, continues to bring people to their knees in front of something they had dismissed or forgotten. But there were evenings when he would close the laptop and sit quietly. And sometimes I would ask what he was thinking, and sometimes he would tell me, those conversations are the reason I am here today. Because one evening, he told me something about the Four Horsemen that I have never repeated publicly, something personal. He told me what he felt when he read about them, and it was not what I expected. It was not fear, it was grief. I want to take you to that evening now, the one I mentioned at the very beginning, the one I have been building toward this entire time. Carlo was 15, dinner was done, the kitchen was quiet. I had made tea and was sitting at the table, and Carlo came in with his laptop the way he often did, settling in to work on his research. But he wasn't working, He was reading. And after maybe 20 minutes of silence, I heard something that stopped me completely. He was crying. Not loudly. Quietly. Controlled. The kind of crying that someone does when they are trying not to cry and losing the battle slowly. His shoulders slightly hunched. Face turned down toward the screen. I put down my tea. "Carlo." He looked up. Eyes red. Face calm. That devastating calm. But cheeks wet, and he didn't try to hide it. He just looked at me. Openly. Completely. I sat down next to him. "What are you reading?" He turned the laptop so I could see. The 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. The Four Horsemen. Cross-referenced with church commentary. Approved private revelations. Historical theological analysis. He had been deep inside this material for hours. I put my hand on his arm. "Talk to me." And what he said next, I wish I could forget. But I can't. He took a breath. "Mom, I've been trying to understand this for a long time. And tonight I think I finally understand it in a way I didn't before. And it's not the war or the famine or the suffering that's making me cry. It's something else." I waited. "It's the first horseman." Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the four horsemen appear in the book of Revelation as harbingers. 4 figures on 4 horses, white, red, black, and pale, each representing a different force: conquest, war, famine, and death. They are among the most debated images in all of Christian scripture. But Carlo was not crying about the interpretation. He was crying about something underneath the interpretation. He said, "The first horseman rides a white horse. He carries a bow. He goes out conquering." Most people think he represents military conquest or political power. But some of the church fathers, and some of the approved mystics, they describe him differently. He paused. They describe him as a counterfeit, a deception. Something that looks like goodness, looks like truth, looks like light, but isn't. He looked at me directly. "Mom, that's the one that scares me the most. Not the red horse, not the pale horse, the white one. Because the red horse, war, people recognize. The black horse, famine, people feel. The pale horse, death, people cannot ignore. But the white horse, the deception, people welcome it. People open the door for it. People call it progress. They call it freedom. They call it enlightenment. And by the time they realize what it actually was, it's already inside." And then he said something I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. He said, "The most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth." I felt the hair on my arms rise. What if the greatest danger in your life is something you already trust? He wasn't speaking theoretically. He was speaking from a place of genuine, felt understanding. The kind that lives in the body, not just the mind. The kind that makes you cry. He continued, "The spiritual battle isn't happening out there, Mom. It's happening in here." He touched his chest, always the same gesture. It's happening in the choices people make about what they believe, about what they allow into their minds, about what they give their hearts to. And the most dangerous weapon in that battle is not something ugly. It's something beautiful, something convincing, something that feels like truth, but leads away from it. He closed the laptop gently. "That's what the white horseman is, and that's why I'm scared. Not for the world ending, but for the souls that are going to be lost inside a deception so complete that they won't even know to look for a way out." I didn't speak for a long time, and then I asked, because I am his mother and this was my 15-year-old son, and he was not supposed to be carrying this alone. I asked him, "Carlo, what do we do? What is the answer?" He looked at me with such clarity, such absolute, unshakable clarity. "The Eucharist, Mom. That's the answer. It has always been the answer. When you receive Jesus truly, when you really believe, really open yourself, he becomes your anchor. And an anchored soul cannot be swept away. It can be shaken, it can suffer, but it cannot be lost. not if it holds on. He said, "That's why I'm building what I'm building, not to scare people, never to scare them, but to give them an anchor before the storm arrives. Because the storm—" He stopped. He looked out the window. Milan outside, indifferent and bright. "The storm is already here, Mom. Most people just haven't felt the wind yet. I want to stop here and speak to you directly, because I know some of you watching this are comfortable. Some of you are skeptical. Some of you believe, but believe at a safe distance without letting faith cost you anything. And I am not here to frighten you. That was never Carlo's way, and it will not be mine. But I am asking you, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, to consider what my son said at that kitchen table. Not as prophecy, not as doom, as a question. What are you anchored to? The most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth. And the world Carlo described, the world of quiet deception, of beautiful lies, of a white horse nobody recognizes as dangerous because it looks so much like something good. That world is not coming. It is here. You feel it. I think you already feel it. The noise that never stops. The confusion about what is true. The exhaustion of trying to stay grounded when everything around you is moving and pulling in so many directions. Carlo knew his answer. He had known it since he was 7 years old, kneeling at Mass, receiving the Eucharist with a reverence that embarrassed me slightly back then because I didn't yet understand what he understood. He knew. And he spent every day of his short, magnificent, heartbreaking life trying to make sure that others could know too. He died on October 12, 2006, 15 years old. Diagnosed with leukemia just days before, sudden, devastating, the way the worst things always are. He deteriorated quickly, and in those final days, in that hospital, I sat beside him and held his hand and thought about every conversation we had ever had. I thought about the White Horsemen. I thought about anchors, and I looked at my son, pale and exhausted and so young, so terribly young, and I realized he was the most anchored person I had ever known. Nothing, not illness, not fear, not the proximity of death, had moved him even slightly from where he had chosen to stand. He offered his suffering for the Pope and for the Church. He said to me, near the end, "Mom, I'm happy to go. I don't want to waste even a drop of this suffering. 15 years old, I am his mother, and I was not as brave as he was. I am still not as brave as he was, but he left me something. He left me the anchor. I want to tell you what grief feels like when you are the mother of a saint. When Carlo died, I lost North. I was angry at God. I have not said that publicly very often, but I am saying it now because it is true. Not a dramatic, theatrical anger, a quiet, cold, withdrawing kind. The kind that sits in a corner of your heart and refuses to move. I thought, you gave me this child. You gave me a boy who led me back to faith, who showed me what it looked like to actually live in your presence. And then you took him at 15. For a time, I couldn't reconcile that. I went through the motions of faith, but inside I was empty. The garden Carlo had so carefully cultivated in me had been abandoned. Still there, but nothing growing. And then the letters started arriving. From Italy, from other countries. From people who had found his website, who had prayed to him in moments of desperation, and who wrote to tell us that something had changed. An illness improved, a marriage restored, a soul that had been walking away from God had turned around and come back. I read every single one, and slowly they began to reframe the question I had been asking. I had been asking, why did God take him so soon? The letters began to suggest something different. What if the brevity was the point? What if 15 years, lived the way Carlo lived them, accomplished something that 70 ordinary years could not? I began to sit with that. 8 months after his death, I stayed behind after Mass. The church was empty, and for the first time since losing him, I actually prayed. Not mechanical prayer, real prayer. I said out loud, quietly, into the silence. I don't understand, but I'm here, and I'm listening. That was the whole prayer. What happened next, I cannot explain rationally, only that I felt something real. A presence. A warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Something that felt like being seen by something that had been waiting, patiently, for me to go still enough to feel it. And when I left, something had shifted. I kept returning to that conversation at the kitchen table, to Carlo's tears, to what he had said about anchors. And one night, lying awake in the dark, I understood something I had completely missed the first time. He had been talking to me, not just philosophically, personally, as my son, knowing, in whatever way he knew things, that I would need those words later, that I would be exactly where I was in that moment, untethered, alone, reaching for something to hold. He had given it to me in advance. I held on, and slowly the garden came back. Not the same garden, deeper rooted, less decorative. A faith that has been tested leaves marks, but it also leaves something that untested faith never quite has. Permanence. Carlo's body, exhumed years after his death, was found incorrupt, preserved, intact. I stood before that on my knees, not as a theologian or a public figure, just as a woman who used to argue with God in the dark, on my knees, finally anchored, finally still. I want to speak to you directly now, not as Carlo's mother, not as someone telling a story, as one human being to another. If you have stayed with me this long, I don't think that happened by accident. Carlo believed that nothing was accidental when it came to souls, that every encounter, every story heard at the right moment, every unexpected tear in the eyes of someone who thought they were just watching a video, he believed those moments were arranged, carefully, lovingly, by something much larger than any of us. So before we finish, what is your anchor? Not what you were raised to believe. Not what you say when someone asks. What actually holds you? What is the thing in your life that, if everything else collapsed, would still be standing? Because the world Carlo described at that kitchen table is not coming. It is here. You feel it. The noise that never stops. The confusion about what is true. The exhaustion of trying to stay grounded when everything is moving so fast. The most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth. Carlo's answer was simple, not easy, simple. The Eucharist, prayer, stillness, choosing every single day to return to the one thing that does not move. You don't have to be extraordinary to do that. Carlo was extraordinary, but his prescription was available to everyone. Every person watching this, regardless of where you are in your faith, regardless of how long you have been away, or how far you feel from God right now, the anchor is still there. It has not moved. It has been waiting. And I believe, with everything I have left, that my son is still working, still interceding, still doing what he always did, just from a different place now. He saw you coming. Don't waste the moment. If you felt something while watching this, don't scroll away. That may be the only warning you receive. That quiet pull in your chest, that thing stirring somewhere underneath all the noise of your ordinary day, pay attention to it. Carlo would tell you to pay attention to it. If this testimony touched you, share it, not because of views or algorithms, but because there is someone in your life, you already know who needs to hear this before something happens that makes them wish they had heard it sooner. Share it for that person. And if you want to stay close, if you want to keep hearing these conversations about faith, about Carlo, about the things that actually matter underneath everything else, subscribe. Because what I still have to share goes deeper than what I've told you today, and I believe the right people are meant to hear it. Leave me a comment before you go. Tell me, honestly, simply, what are you anchored to right now? I read every single one, and I pray for the people who write them. Carlo used to say that no soul who sincerely seeks God ever seeks in vain. I believe that. And I believe you are seeking. So keep going. The most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth. Carlo Acutis.